The sun had just dropped behind the low hills when Silas Brant heard the gate creak. Not the wind creak of dry wood settling, but the deliberate, hesitant push of iron on iron. That sound never came without trouble. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out from the barn's shadow. The sky still glowed with the last smear of orange. A storm had been threatening all day, curling around the ridges like a dog waiting to bite. But now there was only dust and her. She leaned against the post, one boot missing, her coat torn and stained with blood. Her hat hung limp in her hand, and her face was hidden beneath a fall of matted, wind-blown hair. Silas raised the barrel halfway, just enough to mean business. "You lost?" She didn't answer. "Name yourself," he said, sharper. Still nothing. He stepped closer, boots crunching gravel. Then she lifted her head. Her face was bruised, one eye nearly swollen shut. But when she opened her mouth, her voice cracked the air like thunder far off. "Silas," she whispered, and he nearly dropped the rifle. He hadn't heard that voice in 2 decades, not since Fort Glory. Not since the night he made a choice and rode west, leaving fire behind him and silence in its place. The woman staggered. Silas caught her before she fell. Up close, he could see the blood was fresh, a clean wound high in the ribs. Gunshot, maybe. Clean through if she was lucky. He looked down at her again. "Mira?" Her eyelids fluttered. Then she was out cold. Inside the ranch house, Silas worked by lantern light. He cleaned the wound, packed it with whiskey-doused cloth, stitched what he could. His hands remembered the work, though they trembled more than they used to. She lay still, breathing shallow, her chest rising just enough to count her as living. He hadn't said that name, Mira, in 20 years, and now here she was, bleeding on his table, whispering his name like a ghost come to collect. He poured a second glass of rye and drank it slow. Then he sat back in the old chair and watched her sleep, listening to the storm begin to roll in across the plains. She stirred before dawn. Silas was still in the chair, boots planted, rifle close. Mira's eyes opened slowly, blinking at the ceiling's shadows. "You always did sleep heavy," he said. She didn't smile. Instead, she turned her head, winced, and asked, "Where am I?" "My place. You crossed onto Brant land just before sundown. Made it to the gate." Her throat was dry. "You could have left me. I almost did." He poured water from the clay jug, helped her sip. Her hands were too weak to hold the cup. "I'm not here to ruin you," she rasped. "I doubt you're here by accident." Silas studied her face. Older now, scarred in places, but still the woman who once pulled him off the floor of a border fort after a failed supply run. Still the woman who begged him to ride with her, and whom he left behind when orders came calling. "You said my name," he said. "I didn't know where else to go. You got plenty of choices between here and the river." She looked away. Not anymore. By mid-morning she could sit up. Silas had made eggs and beans. She ate slow, every movement cautious, like her ribs reminded her with every breath that she wasn't done paying for whatever fight she'd fled. "You still keep that horse barn locked?" she asked, glancing toward the back door. "I do." "Good. Someone might come looking. You being hunted?" She met his eyes, and didn't answer. That was answer enough. Silas leaned back in his chair. "You left something behind last time I saw you." Mira tilted her head. "My name," he said. "You never used it. Not once. Until yesterday." She set her fork down. "Because I didn't know if you deserved it. And now, I don't know if I deserve it." Later, Silas sat outside on the porch, sharpening his old knife. The storm had passed. The land was wet and quiet, soaked in the kind of hush that always came after thunder. He looked down the trail. Empty, but not for long. Inside, she was resting again, and in his mind, old voices stirred, officers barking orders, Mira screaming his name across the yard at Fort Glory, the smell of canvas burning in the wind. He hadn't thought of those days in years. But now she was here, alive, and speaking truths with silence that cut deeper than any knife. So before we ride straight into the fire, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. If frontier stories speak to your soul. The morning sun cast long golden lines across the wooden floorboards, and with them came a silence that felt less like peace and more like a question waiting to be asked. Silas Brant sat at the kitchen table, boots on the floor, elbows on his knees, turning the same tin cup in his hands over and over. Mira lay on the small cot in the corner, breathing steadier now. Her face had color again, but her eyes, when they opened, still looked like they were seeing ghosts. She didn't speak right away when she woke, just watched him from the cot. "You've got new scars," she finally said. "So do you." A pause. "I suppose we earned them." Silas gave a slow nod. "That depends on which ones we're talking about." He set the cup down and stood. "You want to tell me who shot you?" "Not really." "You going to?" "Eventually." He crossed to the window and looked out over the hills. The cattle were still there, grazing like none of it mattered. Maybe it didn't, to them. "I still got that draw near the fence," he said, "the one we used to ride down for water." Mira didn't respond. "You remember it?" "I remember everything," she said quietly. That stopped him. He turned back toward her. "Even the day I left?" She didn't blink, especially that one. Outside, Silas brought in more firewood. The motion helped. It gave his hands something to do besides shake. When he came back inside, she was sitting up, holding something in her lap. A silver locket. The hinge was broken, the clasp bent. She was rubbing her thumb along the edge like she was trying to make it tell her something. "You kept that?" he asked. "It was mine before you. You threw it at me when I left." "I missed." Silas sat across from her again. "I thought you were dead," he said. "You didn't stay long enough to know for sure." His jaw tightened. "I got orders. Fort pulled out the next day. They said anyone left behind was expendable. And you agreed." "I didn't have a choice." Mira's voice dropped to a low whisper. "We all have choices. You just made yours early." The words struck harder than they should have. He'd told himself for years that walking away from that fort had been the only way. The chain of command had ruled every breath he took. But Mira had been right there, hand outstretched, and he'd walked past it like it was a trap. Around midday, the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the canyon trail. Silas stood and reached for his rifle. Mira didn't flinch. He stepped onto the porch. 2 riders were coming slow, not soldiers, not outlaws either, locals. The first was Sheriff Royce Dalton. The second was his new deputy, a young pup named Collar, who wore a badge too big for his chest and a smirk too quick for his face. Dalton reined in. "Mornin', Brant," he said. "Mornin'. Got something I need your eyes on." Dalton reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sketch, pencil on parchment. Silas didn't have to open it to know. "She's inside," he said flatly. Dalton blinked. "Didn't say who it was." "You didn't have to." Dalton exchanged a glance with Collar. Name's Mira Tamson, former courier, suspected of aiding Confederates in the last year of the war, disappeared after Fort Glory fell. Silas didn't answer. You helping her? Dalton asked. She was bleeding when I found her. I helped her live. Dalton nodded slowly. You know the rules. Harboring a fugitive, especially one wanted for treason, carries weight. She didn't come here to cause trouble. Intent don't erase history. Silas's hand dropped near the rifle at his side. Dalton noticed. I ain't here to start a fight, Brant. I respect you. Always have. But I need to talk to her. She's resting. Dalton frowned. You going to make me wait? Silas stepped down one stair. I'm going to ask you to remember what mercy looks like. Dalton looked past him, toward the door. Then he sighed and turned his horse. You got till morning, he said. Then I'm coming back, and next time I won't be alone. They rode off. Mira stepped into the doorway behind Silas, pale and quiet. He's not wrong, she said. I did run. I did carry letters I shouldn't have. Then why come back here? Because I needed you to hear why. Silas looked at her, then started talking. But she didn't answer right away. Instead, she limped back to the table, reached into her satchel, and pulled out a yellowed envelope. It was sealed, addressed to Silas Brant. He took it from her, fingers slow and unsure. I wrote that the night before you left, she said. Never got to send it. Never thought you'd read it. He didn't open it yet, just held it in his hands like it might catch fire. The envelope was worn at the corners, the paper soft from years of friction, but the seal was still intact. Silas stared at it like it might bite him. His name, written in Mira's slanted hand, cut cleaner than any knife. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he set it on the mantel, next to the old tin lantern he hadn't lit since last winter. Mira sat at the table again, her hands wrapped tight around a mug that no longer steamed. Her breath was shallow, but her voice steady. I wrote that letter to ask for one thing, she said. A reason. Silas leaned against the far wall. For me leaving? She nodded. I didn't have one then, he said. Not a good one. You had orders. I had fear. That landed. Mira's eyes dropped to the table. You were the only man who didn't look at me like I was either a traitor or a token. And I still left, he said, like a coward. Outside, the wind picked up, low and whining, brushing dust against the walls. She looked up at him. Why now, Silas? Why help me now? Because I never stopped hearing your voice, he said. Not in 20 years, not in the quiet, not in my sleep. She closed her eyes for a long moment, then opened them with something harder behind the pupils. I didn't just run, she said. I disappeared because I carried letters that could have ended lives. Silas took a step forward. What kind of letters? Orders, coordinates, transfer notices, but not just Confederate. Union, too. I didn't know until it was too late that both sides were using me. His jaw tightened. So you weren't a courier. You were a pawn. I was 16 when they recruited me. Thought I was helping peace talks. Then Fort Glory burned, and I ran. Silas shook his head. And now, I'm trying to end it. At sundown, he saddled the buckskin gelding and rode to the ridge behind his land. From there, he could see Dalton's camp. 2 lanterns burning low near the cottonwoods, the silhouette of a third man he didn't recognize moving between horses. He rode back slow. Inside, Mira had fallen asleep again, but the envelope was gone from the mantel. He found it on the table, opened now, The letter laid flat beside a single object, a brass locket, the one she'd once thrown at him as he boarded the supply wagon out of Fort Glory. He sat, opened the letter, and read. Silas, if you're reading this, then I didn't die, but I wish I had the courage to say it aloud. I loved you, and I still do. But love isn't enough when trust is missing. I'm not angry you followed orders. I'm angry you never turned back. If you ever do, I'll be waiting, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. Mira. He folded it slowly. The locket, when he opened it, still held the dried lavender she used to tuck in her hair. Faded, dust-scented, but real. That night he sat beside the fire with her across from him. I read it, he said. I figured. He placed the locket on the table. You still believe in quiet, safe places? She didn't answer for a moment. Then, I stopped believing in a lot of things, but I never stopped hoping. He looked into the flames. Sheriff comes at dawn. You can't be here when he does. I don't run well anymore. Then I'll ride with you. That startled her. You'd do that? I left you once. I don't get to do that again. Near midnight, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Silas jumped to his feet, rifle in hand. A figure stood just beyond the porch, backlit by a lantern. It wasn't Dalton. It was Collar, the young deputy. He raised both hands. Not here to shoot, he called. Just need to talk. Silas opened the door. Make it quick. Collar approached slowly. Sheriff's planning to take her in, dead or alive. Said he got orders from higher up. I don't care. I do, Collar said. I read the file. She was listed as missing, not guilty. No trial. Just vanished. What do you want from me? I want to help, the boy said. But if you're staying, I need to know you'll draw steel if it comes to that. Silas looked over his shoulder. Mira stood behind the curtain, her hand on the edge. He looked back at Collar. I'll do more than draw. Collar nodded. I'll slow him down at the ridge. Give you time. Then he turned and rode off. Silas shut the door and turned to her. We ride before sunup, he said. She nodded. He paused. Do you trust me? I don't know, she said honestly, but I'll ride with you anyway. The sky was the color of cold iron when they left. Mira rode Silas's smaller roan mare, her wound bound tight, her coat cinched at the waist. She moved stiff in the saddle, like every breath reminded her she wasn't whole yet. But her grip on the reins was steady. Silas led, rifle slung across his back, eyes sweeping the horizon. They cut down through Crow's Gully, a narrow creek bed hidden under frost-bitten cottonwoods. It was old smuggling country, full of blind corners and places a man could disappear. That's why Silas chose it. By the time first light kissed the ridges, they'd covered 6 miles. Then Mira's voice broke the silence. You always ride like the trail's behind you. Silas didn't turn. It usually is. She smiled faintly, then winced. You sure this'll get us through? It will. They rode another hour before resting. Silas helped her down, and they found a sheltered pocket beneath an outcrop.
He started a smokeless fire, brewed bitter coffee, and set a dry biscuit in her hand. I dreamed about this, she said, chewing slowly. This? Riding beside you again, being hunted, you choosing to stay. Silas stared into the fire.
Did it end well? She shook her head. Didn't end at all. Mid-morning brought the first sign of pursuit. Hoofprints coming fast over the ridge behind them. Silas caught them from high ground. At least 4 riders. One of them big enough to be Dalton. "They're coming," he said when he returned. Mira didn't flinch. He packed fast, checking her saddle and adjusting the cinch. She stopped him. "You can go now, you know." He looked at her. "You've done enough," she said. "No one would fault you." He shook his head. "I'm not doing this for you." She blinked. "Then why?" "For me." He mounted up. "Let's ride." They reached the fork to River Pass just before noon. A single wooden post stuck up from the dirt. Black lettering faded by rain. Tucson, 30 miles. River Pass, 12. Silas dismounted and reached under the marker. He pulled out a leather-wrapped bundle he'd stashed a decade ago. Maps, an old brass compass, and something heavier. He handed her a folded envelope. "Papers," he said. "A new name. Old friend in Tucson can help you vanish." Mira didn't take it. "You planned this?" "I thought about it. Years ago. Never used it. Didn't have reason to." She stared at him. "And now you do?" "I told you. I hear your voice even when you're not speaking." She finally took the bundle. Her hands shook. They didn't see Dalton until they were already surrounded. 3 riders came from the east, dusty, quiet, hard-eyed. Dalton himself approached from the south trail, rifle resting across his saddle horn. He pulled up 10 yards off. "Well," he said, "here we are." Silas stepped between them and Mira. "She's not the threat you think she is." Dalton sighed. "I don't care what she is. I got a warrant and orders." Silas didn't move. "You'll have to go through me." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Been sure since last night." Behind him, Mara shifted in the saddle. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Then read this," she said. "You'll find the real orders there." Dalton caught it when she tossed it. He opened it, read. His jaw worked. "This real?" he muttered. Silas nodded. "Straight from the records in Fort Glory. I found it 2 weeks after she vanished. Been sitting in my safe till now." Dalton looked at Mira, then back at Silas. "I could still take her in," he said. "You could. But I'd look like a fool." "You would." The sheriff sighed and tore the paper in half. "You've got till dusk. After that I never saw you." He turned and rode off. The others followed. When they were gone, Mira looked at Silas. "Why didn't you tell me you had that?" "Because I didn't know if I'd ever be brave enough to use it." She dismounted slowly and walked to him. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me." "I have to." "No," he said. "You don't." "But I will." She leaned forward and kissed his cheek. The wind picked up then, cool and quiet. They stood there a moment, just 2 people with no more lies between them. Then she turned and rode toward River Pass. And Silas stood alone. But for the first time, the land didn't feel empty. Silas didn't move from that ridge for a long while, not until the echo of Mira's horse had disappeared into the canyon pass, swallowed by wind and distance. The sun had risen high by the time he climbed back into the saddle. He didn't follow her. He turned west instead, toward home. The ride back to the ranch was slower. He wasn't in a hurry now, the kind of hurry he'd lived in most of his life, the hurry to forget, to outrun shame, to bury what memory refused to release. Was gone. When he reached the front gate, he saw the latch had been disturbed. He dismounted, rifle ready. Inside, his barn door swung open. The first voice stopped him in his tracks. "You always had a soft heart, Brant. Didn't think it'd get you this far." Micah Rudd stepped out from the shadows, revolver in hand. His grin was wolf-like, and his eyes glinted with something crueler than greed. "Micah," One of the men who'd run border intelligence out of Fort Glory, a man who'd vanished after the fire. "You're supposed to be dead," Silas said, "only on paper." Micah motioned with the gun. "Put it down." Silas didn't. "You followed her?" "She led me to you," Micah said. "All I had to do was wait." He stepped closer. "You're wondering why, aren't you? Why come back after all this time?" Silas didn't answer. Micah spat. "Because some ghosts don't stay buried, especially not the ones that remember what we did." Silas slowly lowered the rifle, but not all the way. "What do you want?" "I want that locket." Silas blinked. "What?" "You heard me. That locket she used to wear. I know she gave it to you. I know what's inside." Silas narrowed his eyes. "It's just lavender." Micah shook his head. "It's not. There's a folded page inside the lining, one of the original cipher keys. That little piece of metal's worth more than your land and your damn life." Silas thought back to the table, to the night before. Mira had left the locket behind. She hadn't taken it with her. Without a word, Silas turned and walked into the house, heart pounding. He found the locket right where she'd left it, on the hearthstone, beside the folded envelope. He opened the back. There, tucked behind the sprig of dried lavender, was a slip of yellowed paper, folded tight. He didn't unfold it, just stared at it for a breath. Then he put it in his pocket. When he stepped outside, Micah was waiting. "Well," Micah said. Silas tossed him the locket. Micah caught it, grinned, opened it. His grin vanished. "You took it." Silas shrugged. "Guess I did." Micah raised the gun, but Silas had already moved. He fired once, center mass. Micah staggered, dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. "You still shoot like a soldier," he coughed. "No," Silas said. "I shoot like a man protecting what's left." Micah slumped forward, dead before he hit the dirt. That night Silas built a fire behind the barn. He stood alone in the flickering light and fed the folded paper to the flames. It curled and blackened, words vanishing into ash. He didn't know if it had been a cipher key or a dead man's obsession. Didn't care. The only truth he needed was that she hadn't taken it with her. She hadn't needed it anymore, and neither did he. As the last ember faded, Silas looked up at the stars and whispered, "Ride far, Mira. Ride quiet." The town of Laythorne sat like a bruise in the valley, too stubborn to fade and too proud to heal. Silas hadn't ridden in for nearly 3 years, not since a cattle auction turned into a pistol standoff over rustled brands. But today, he tied his horse outside the sheriff's office just after noon, dust rising soft around his boots. He carried no rifle this time, just the locket, now empty, clutched in one calloused hand. Inside, Sheriff Dalton looked up from his desk with surprise, and something harder behind the eyes. "You're walking free," he said. Silas nodded. "And you're still breathing. Seems fair." Dalton gestured to the chair across from him. "I expected you'd be halfway to Tucson." "She made it that far. That's what matters." Dalton studied him for a long moment, then leaned back. "Caller told me what you did, about that paper from Fort Glory. Said it had teeth. It did. And I burned it." That brought Dalton forward in his seat. "You what?" "You heard me," Silas said. "It's gone." "Why?" "Because it was poison. She came here trying to outrun it. I figured the least I could do was bury it myself." Dalton's mouth tightened. "You could have used it to clear your name. Could have gotten her a pardon." "I didn't need a pardon. I needed peace." Dalton exhaled slowly. then stood. "You're not the man I remember. Neither are you." They stared at each other. Then Dalton reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded sheet, an official notice, printed and stamped. He handed it over. Silas unfolded it. "Warrant for Mira Tamsin, effective 1865, officially rescinded, stamped and signed by territorial officials. Caller rode through the night," Dalton said. "Brought them the same story you did. They cleared her." Silas closed his eyes for a moment. A long, quiet moment. "She won't know," he said. "Maybe not," Dalton said. "But you will." Silas refolded the paper, tucked it into his coat. "I'll make sure she hears it." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "You going after her?" "No," Silas said. "She's earned her distance, but someday word will reach her. From me or from someone else." He stood to leave. Dalton called after him, "Brant." Silas turned. "I hope you know you did right." Silas paused. "Not always," he said, "but this time I didn't walk away." That evening, back on his land, Silas found himself standing at the edge of the north pasture, looking toward the pass. The wind was sharp, carrying hints of cold, and the kind of silence only open space could give. He pulled the warrant from his coat and placed it inside the empty locket. Then he walked to the old oak near the draw, dug a shallow hole beneath its roots, and buried the locket there. Not hidden, just resting. A truth laid to rest, where the land could hold it. As the sun slipped behind the hills, he tipped his hat and whispered, "Wherever you are, Mira, you're free now." 2 weeks passed without word. Silas didn't expect any. The land kept him busy, mending fences, clearing out the old stream bed, tending to calves too young to stand without a push. And in the quiet moments, when the wind ran soft through the grass, he found himself reaching for thoughts of her, not to relive what had been, but to feel what still lingered. He started leaving the porch light burning after dark, not out of hope, out of memory. One morning, just as the fog began to lift from the lower slopes, a rider crested the ridge. Silas squinted. It wasn't her. It was a young man, barely 20, with a telegram pouch strapped to his saddle and a Union-issue rifle bouncing behind him. "Silas Brant?" the boy asked as he dismounted. Silas nodded. The boy handed over a sealed note, then turned and rode off without waiting for a reply. Silas stared at it. The envelope bore no return address, just a simple mark at the bottom corner, a small sun drawn in ink, her mark. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside, the paper held only one line. "I crossed at River Pass. The sky was clear. I carried your name with me." He read it 3 times before folding it and placing it in the inside pocket of his coat. She was safe. She remembered. That was enough. That afternoon he saddled the roan mare, not for escape, not for chase, but for a ride with no end in mind. He took the west trail, where the hills rolled like whispers and the cottonwoods leaned in close like they were listening. By dusk, he reached the bluff above Widow's Creek, where once he'd planned to build a second home. He'd never laid the foundation, just measured it in silence. Now he stepped down from the saddle, walked to the edge, and sat. Below, the water ran soft and slow. A coyote barked in the distance. Somewhere far off, a hawk circled, wings stretched like a promise in the wind. He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded letter again. Then he read it aloud, slowly, like prayer. When he was done, he spoke to the wind. "I carried yours, too." He sat until the stars came, until the moon cut silver across the water. When he rode back, He left the letter behind, pinned to a tree stump with a single nail. He didn't need it anymore. He knew who he was now, not the man who left, not just the one who stayed, but the one who chose mercy when justice had already taken too much. Justice rides fast, but sometimes mercy rides faster. There are men who run from the past, and men who bury it, but the rare few turn back to face it and carry it forward with purpose. Silas Brant bore his guilt like weight in the saddle, and in choosing to stand for something more than law or shame, he carved a new shape out of silence. What he gave Mira was not just protection. It was acknowledgement. What he reclaimed was not pride, but clarity. In the end, it was not the badge nor the bullet that defined him. It was the courage to stay when it would have been easier to vanish. Some names echo in courtrooms, others in the hush between hooves on dirt. And the truest ones are spoken in letters never meant to be read aloud, but carried always.